Decades of unrest in Northern Ireland culminated in 1998 with a historic peace accord.
After 2 years of talks and after a generation of bloodshed,
the two prime ministers emerged just before 6 this evening to inaugurate the historic agreement they hope will usher in a new era for the island.
This is the Good Friday Agreement. It was signed by the British, the Irish and the local governments and touched upon every single aspect of life in Northern Ireland. It was approved by public votes, by a majority, but it wasn't by any means an end to all conflict.
May God forgive them for what they've just done to Ulster. May God forgive them, because I won't, and neither will the children of Ulster.
Journalists, politicians and historians often cite this moment as the end of the conflict, which was known as the Troubles. In this video, I'll walk you through the 10 main events leading up to the signing of this historic accord with hindsight. It began in the 1920s. The Emerald Isle was at war with itself. The island had 4 provinces, of which the northernmost had always been culturally distinct. Ulster was mostly Protestant, and the majority here wanted to remain within the UK, whereas the rest of the island was mostly Catholic, and they were seeking increasing levels of self-determination. They are also often referred to as Republicans or Nationalists, whereas Loyalists and Unionists favoured the status quo. The island was divided to the bone, and Irish Republicans had resisted the British rules for years in a guerrilla war. Until, in 1921, the Brits conceded. The island was split between Northern and Southern Ireland, which at this point was still both part of the UK. From a distance, it seemed like a win-win, but a third of Northern Ireland was Catholic and was against British rule. This became particularly harrowing when Southern Ireland won its independence. The newly formed Irish Republican Army, or the IRA, never truly disappeared. Even though they were small and clandestine, they fought for the rights of the mostly Catholic minority that wanted unification with Ireland.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
The rise of the civil rights movement in the United States changed something in Northern Ireland. In the north of Northern Ireland, in a city called Derry, a march was held in support of the civil rights for Catholics. They were a minority in Northern Ireland and they felt discriminated against. They complained about unfair treatment by the Protestant-controlled police, and this day they let their dissatisfaction known. The march started peacefully, but at some point it turned violent. The city of Derry was the stage of violent protests that lasted for 3 days. At some point, the British Army was deployed to restore order. These violent protests and these clashes with the police is often cited as the start of the Troubles. In the early 1970s, protests weren't uncommon. The Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association often organized marches to lobby against discrimination against Catholics. They were protesting the government's policy to imprison suspected paramilitary members without giving them a trial or a charge. It started peacefully, but at some point it escalated. British soldiers opened fire at unarmed protesters. They killed 13 people and injured many more. This became known as Bloody Sunday. After this day, many Catholics in Northern Ireland joined the IRA. It was a major turning point that heated the conflict even further, and this alarmed the British government. Only a month later, the British government suspended the Northern Ireland Assembly. This effectively meant that the British government was now directly in charge of all of Northern Ireland's affairs. The guerrilla war intensified.
Officers here at Killeen, which was the biggest of the posts attacked, are really quite used to this sort of thing. In fact, this attack is the 4th bomb raid on the post this year.
What were these people like? Were they masked? Or what?
Anoraks with hoods up.
They had their hoods.
They had hoods.
July 21st. Across Ireland, bombs exploded. 3 large car bombs in the centre of Derry, the train line between Belfast and Dublin, but most of them in the city centre of Belfast. Over a period of only 80 minutes, 22 bombs exploded in the city centre. Total chaos and panic broke out. 9 people were killed and many more injured. As the bombing and the violence continued, there were negotiations behind closed doors.
9 people died. 6 were killed at Oxford Street bus station.
In a mansion just outside of London, towards the end of 1973, an accord was reached. This is the Sunningdale Agreement. The agreement was brief, but had far-reaching implications. Both the Irish and the British government agreed that if the majority of the people of Northern Ireland should indicate a wish to become part of a united Ireland, that the British government would support that wish. They also agreed to form the Council of Ireland, which gave the Irish government a formal say in the affairs of Northern Ireland, and the power of government would be shared between the UK and Ireland. This was arguably the boldest and the biggest result of this conference. It came into effect.
The new Northern Ireland Assembly, in which Catholics and Protestants share power for the first time in history, held its first meeting this week amid scenes of chaos and anarchy.
But especially amongst the Unionists, there was a lot of resistance. They were content with the status quo and wanted to remain part of the UK. They were the majority, and they called for a general strike to protest this agreement.
So what is going to happen now?
I think the essential services will collapse in a matter of hours.
That means hospitals?
It means everything.
It took only 5 months for the agreement to collapse. It was a bitter blow, but with hindsight, we also know that this paved the way for future negotiations. Since the early 1960s, the British Parachute Regiment has had a strong presence in Northern Ireland.
The old RUC station serves as a heavily fortified barracks for 75 men of the 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment. These paras have long ago given up any attempt at friendship or even exchanging a perfunctory greeting with the people. They know every villager individually. The villagers recognize every one of them, but they utterly ignore them.
It was soldiers from the Parachute Regiment that opened fire in Derry on Bloody Sunday at the beginning of the Troubles. The IRA despised them. On August 27th, soldiers from the 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment left their barracks. They passed by Warrenpoint, a road that they knew posed significant risks, but that they decided to take to avoid setting a pattern. As they just passed Warrenpoint and drove along the river to the north, they were hit by 2 bombs. Only seconds later, they came under rifle fire. The ambush killed 18 British soldiers. It was the deadliest attack since the British Army came to Northern Ireland almost a decade earlier. That very same day, the cousin of Queen Elizabeth was at his holiday home in Clifney. After days of rain, the sun finally broke through and he decided to take his boat out on the open water. 15 minutes after setting sail, a bomb was activated. Lord Mountbatten and several of his family members were instantly killed. The bombing and the violence continued sporadically without any significant progress for years. But behind closed doors in 1994, several months of secret negotiations culminated in a public statement. The IRA announced a ceasefire. It read, "Recognizing the potential of the current situation and in order to enhance the democratic process, the leadership of the IRA have decided that as of midnight August 31st, there will be a complete cessation of military operations." This was a major turning point. It led to more talks, and it paved the way for the biggest breakthrough that was yet to come.
Now we can see the pictures there of Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern. I think perhaps we still have problems with the sound. Let me just interrupt you because I think we can now hear the Prime Minister.
On an all-Ireland basis. The chance to live in peace. The chance to raise children out of the shadow of fear. That is all that the people of Northern Ireland have ever asked for. Today we have just a sense of the prize that is before us. The work to win that prize goes on. We cannot, we must not let it slip from our grasp.
The people were naturally skeptical of the agreement. They had tried and failed before, but this time it was different. The peace agreement was much more detailed than its predecessors. It was signed by the large and the smaller parties that were involved in the conflict. These pages describe a common vision on the future of Northern Ireland that all parties signed. A future in which the power of government was shared between unionists and nationalists, in which all citizens have equal human rights regardless of their political affiliation, and a future without armed conflict. It was the most detailed and collaborative agreement to date, and it touched upon every element of Northern Ireland's politics. The agreement by no means ended all the region's problems, but it was an important milestone towards greater political stability and cooperation in the region. The sectarian tensions still exist, and there still are periods of violence and unrest. With Brexit, the legacy of the agreement is even further challenged. Northern Ireland has come a very long way, and still has a long way to go. Watch one of these 2 videos next. On the left side is my personal suggestion for you to watch next, and on the right is your best choice according to the YouTube algorithm. Let me know which one won, and I'll see you there.